Very happy to have David Spivak from the Topos Institute in California, who's going to tell us about what accounting for our inventiveness.
Okay, thank you. They told me I'd be talking to an audience of category theorists and biologists, so that was a difficult task to prepare for. So I figured, well, mathematicians are animals, so let's just do that. So the idea here is I want to start with remembering how and why we're here, just to ground it and center us a little bit. So the etymology of remember is apparently ambiguous. It could either mean to put the members back together, or it could mean to care about or attend to something. So I'm asking us to put back together or care about putting back together how it is that we came to be. Let's remember that. Okay. So this is a colloquium at the National Institute for Theory in Mathematics and Biology. And apparently, maybe the audience is infinity category theorists and mathematical biologists. And to get here, we planned our trips, and gas was put into airplanes, and beds were prepared in hotels, and we somehow came to be here. But what about we, like mathematically inclined researchers? How did we come to be here? How can we account for animals thinking about spheres? Like what is that about? Or animals thinking about their own constitution as a biological entity? So this capacity to wonder about like whatever was on this board before had to be built on, at least if you believe in some kind of materialism as a foundation for thinking. You don't have to believe in it, but you can say, well, it works pretty well. In that style of accounting, we're built on bare physics. So we had to build all the way up to this. And so when I'm saying how and why we're here, the how I'm aiming at recipe, like how is it done? And the why is like purpose or like the design of it. And so this workshop was designed. So Ben designed it, said who was going to be here, and that kind of pulled you to come. And that pulled you to decide to book tickets. And when you book tickets, that pulled gas into the airplane. Whereas like all of the how, the extraction and transportation of gas and the way that like Zoom works and the way that like buildings are constructed, those were already in place. We didn't have to build those. Those were already done. And then on top of that, we made a workshop happen. So the question is, how do you explain how that energy got routed within bare physics to bring category theorists to NITMB? And so in this talk, I'm going to be all over the place because I'm trying to connect these two things. But I want to give you what you can count on. And colloquially, to count on something means to rely on it, right? So the word count is a math word, so that's a pun. And in this talk, you can count on puns. So every time something seems ambiguous, I want you to be able to read both meanings of it. And whichever one you choose, that one should be true. So I'm accountable for the math claims being accurate. If I make a math claim, you should be able to count on it. Otherwise, I'm wrong. And you can count on the puns being deliberate. The biology is something where I'm just trying my best. So I care about it, but I'm trying to be accurate. But my angle is unusual. I've never taken a course. So take anything that you hear about that with a grain of salt. In general, we can count on what's actually here and what's been tested. So actuality is this is like actually happening, right? And it's what's here right now. So without it, you couldn't test anything. You couldn't do an experiment. If you didn't have like, that's making a sound, you couldn't do anything. So we're going to count on that. And we're also, in particular, any claim I make about our inventiveness should hold for your notion. Like when you invent mathematics, it should also count there. So you can count on your own experience. And we can also count on gravity. Like we're pretty sure if I drop this, it's going to fall, and thermodynamics and evolution. These have survived repeated testing, so we can count on thermodynamics being true. And we can count on mathematics for consistent accounting. So math is exceptionally self-consistent, and it stands the test of time, both like, lines are still lines, and also our accounting of it, the way we tell the story can stand for long periods of time. And it provides a way to account for phenomena in the world. So the way gravity works is 9.8, meters per second squared or whatever. So it's also true, whether true has a capital T or not. Let's just say lowercase true. It's true like when they say you true a wheel. So a wheel is not a perfect circle. It's just trying to be, in the sense that ideal of a circle, if it gets out of whack, you true the wheel, which makes it more like a circle. And it's kind of an attractor. It's this ideal idea of a circle. And it makes your ride less bumpy the more circular your wheel really is. In the same way, good math should make your ride less bumpy. You shouldn't have to go from infinity categories over to here and then come back. You want to live in infinity categories or something, right? You don't want to keep bouncing around. So a good ideal, a good true, something is true when you don't have to keep bouncing all over the place. And it's some kind of ideal that can serve as an attractor. So one way to route us to like kind of organize this whole talk is, this is not the point of it, but it's something that will come up a few times, is like I was looking for something that's been monotonically increasing since the beginning of time on Earth. And it seems to me that what I'm calling high precision energy routing has been roughly monotonically increasing. So like 4 billion years ago, there were tides and tectonic shifts and stuff was flying all over the place, but it wasn't being routed somewhere. Whereas cells can swim, they can move energy around within themselves deliberately. And then rabbits can, send a neural signal to their limb and kind of very carefully trot around on the grass or whatever. And humans can, direct energy so we can pull oil out of the earth, send it all over to our airplanes and like get in them and stuff like that. So we're routing energy very precisely. And then computers have trillions of voltages that are routed with very high precision. So maybe you could say that one thing life is doing, if you wanted to, is for some reason increasing high precision energy routing. I don't know if that's the right thing to say it's doing, but if we find some monotonically increasing thing, we could say that's what it's doing. And also it kind of seems to me like living things seem to recursively route energy through switches that route energy through switches that route energy through switches. So what I mean by that is that let's say that balance is poised for symmetry breaking. Okay, so you have some symmetry that you can break, right? I can move either direction. So something at rest is different than balance in something. So rest is something on its side, whereas balance is something that you're holding up. And you don't see balance, that dynamic balance, outside of life very much. You don't see something that's just kind of sitting there poised for symmetry breaking. A ball sitting at the top of a hill where just a little flick can cause it to go downhill, or a joystick with all 4 buttons equally pressable, that's poised for symmetry breaking. And so these switches are these balance points where a big change can stem from a small nudge. So you send a signal and then the person, gets on a plane. So life seems to route energy through switches. It doesn't just drop it on the floor. It routes it through switches after switches. And it seems to switch into places where it gets to switch more. Now that's just my own thinking, but that's what it kind of seems like. So this increasing high precision energy routing thing seems to be a consistent phenomenon. So based on what I said before, we should be able to rely on that. You could say, well, like Carl Sagan says, we are the cosmos knowing itself. And maybe that's also increased since the beginning of time, but that's too hard for me. I don't know what that means well enough. But I think it's an interesting idea. And maybe you could try to rewrite the talk with that idea. But can we find a sense of direction? We can maybe find a sense of direction by these monotonically increasing things. So high precision energy routing is what I'm kind of thinking of here, or as a direction, sense of direction. And I'm going to claim that humans are not the first. So I'm a little bit all over the place, but things will start to like line up in a second. So I'm going to claim that humans are not the first to be inventive. For some people, this is obvious. For other people, it's complete heresy. But for me, I'm like, well, humans are very inventive. So by the intermediate value theorem, we weren't invented before. So at some point we became inventive, and it either started like the moment Homo sapiens came around, or maybe like inventiveness came before that. And to me, the standard dogma where you say, no, invention is a human anthropomorphization, no, I think that's anthropocentric. I think it's human racist or something to think that we are the first to be inventive. So I'm going to give a very idiosyncratic account of inventiveness in biology. Again, hopefully it's accurate enough. Or actually, hopefully it's completely accurate. So portability, the red words will be basically high precision energy routing words. So portability is a word I'll come back to, compositionality, which is supposed to remind you of category theory, and high precision energy routing. The idea is that portability is abstraction. Something is portable if it doesn't have to live in this one context. So abstraction, you can take something out of the context and move it somewhere else. And so when you have the same structure in a new substrate, then that's what I'm calling portability. Maybe it's the same structure. Yeah, right. So as forms get more portable, they can compose into larger collectives. So this is true of your abstractions from category theory. These are such portable abstractions, the Cartesian product. You can put it anywhere. And then when you have Cartesian product in a new category, then it composes with other things in that category, and you can build up some new concept that you couldn't build up if you didn't have this portable abstraction. So larger collectives route energy through more switches. You have more things you can do, and then you can get more precision. And it seems to me that repeatedly biology has invented ways to make form more portable. And again, like that's kind of what we're here to do. So I'll track portability more like as the mechanism and high precision energy routing as what it produces. And again, so just repeating the question, how can we account for biology's ability to increase portability again and again? It just keeps doing this. And here we are doing it again. And we think we're humans doing something important, but maybe we're just doing the same thing we've always been doing. So in terms of accounting, I keep using that word because I think of mathematical fields as kind of crystallized accounting systems. So arithmetic accounts for the flow of quantities. If you want to report to the government what your finances are, you have to account in arithmetic. And if you want to account for quantum mechanics, if you're going to give it an account for that, you should know what a Hilbert space is. And if you want to account for probability distributions, probability distributions can account for likelihoods. So each of these is like crystallized in the sense that it's hardened and coherent. It's like the laws of arithmetic make it hardened. It's not kind of floppy. And from mathematics, from this crystallized accounting system, what's happening is we get a conceptual overlay on something. The phenomena of life, poker games and quantities are abstracted and portable, so they can go to the government to check us or whatever. So someone wanted to know if the same goats who left in the morning came back at night. So they like put a stone for each goat. And when it left, they put the stone over on this side. And then when they came back, they put it on this side. They don't have to know which goat is which. They just track with this conceptual overlay of the goat is the rock. And similarly, if you have two fields of goats separated by a fence, then plus is removing the fence. So you have these operations, conceptual operations that mimic or overlay on the real operations, on the real world operations. And so if every mathematical field is an accounting system, then what am I saying a category theory accounts for? Well, I was going to be talking to the biologists at this point, which I think there are none actually in this audience, but at least not in this room. I was going to say that it's for perspective taking and analogizing. So more precisely, category theory is the theory of structure and translation. And a perspective, if I have a perspective, it's like a way of structuring what's there. Like I see it from a certain angle and I say that there are people there and I structure it up. And then migrating from one perspective to another is translating. So analogies translate while preserving the structure we're tracking. If I have an analogy, I'm letting myself drop certain structure and keep other structure. So you're right. So I'm kind of thinking of a functor that preserves limits but not colimits or something. So category theory lets us design mathematical worlds, and translations between them lets us track the structure that we're interested in at the moment. So in this talk, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by giving a very brief history of inventiveness in biology. Then I'll discuss how accounting inventions support portability. And then I'll discuss some math that I think is pretty and relevant. And I'll conclude with a summary. So I was very inspired by this talk by someone named Eric Smith at the Santa Fe Institute called Inevitable Life, where he lays out a theory for the origin of life. And he has a metabolism first versus instead of a control first. So for me, the RNA world seems pretty bizarre as an idea, but metabolism makes sense. So somehow chemistry first. And he calls it a hell theory. It comes from the hot depths of the ocean rather than a heavens theory. It's not a sun-based like origin where we started in the deep sea. And the theory is formulated around reverse TCA cycle, which you don't have to know what that is, but citric acid cycle. So basically in his world, ecosystems, because they fully complete metabolic cycles, are the protagonists. And individual organisms are kind of participating, but they're not what's really going on. But what I wanted to say, what really inspired me was that he likens early life to lightning strikes or hurricanes. So with lightning, there's a potential difference between between the sky and the ground, and then a spark flies between these two things. And that spark actualizes the potential. There was some potential difference. There's some problem, like there's plus and minus, and it has to make the spark. And with hurricanes, it's the same sort of thing. There's this temperature difference between the sky, which is cold, and the ocean, which is hot in the summer. And what happens is that the hurricane, you think of it as like causing all this wind, but in fact, what actually seems to be driving it is that it creates this eye, which is a tube, this little moving tube that sucks the hot air right up that tube and like equalizes that temperature difference much faster. And so in both cases, the difference would be resolved, but it's much faster. It's kind of catalyzed by the hurricane or the lightning. And so he says that early life was another such case, that these deep sea hydrothermal vents emit CH4 and CO2, which are higher energy molecules. They want to go to low energy molecules. And life is the simplest chemistry lab that could do that chemistry. Life goes around trying to take that high energy molecule and move it to low. So it's like looking for something with high potential and then actualizing it. So portability is this abstraction that's supposed to recur over and over. And so in this case, white smokers, these deep sea vents, provide this containment. Not only do they give out these molecules, these high energy molecules, but they also have these little capsules that they call cells. And the first universal common ancestor, whatever we're first coming from, encapsulated itself and left these things. So it made itself, that chemistry became portable. Something had to leave that vent. So it became portable in that sense. And if you're interested, someone named Terence Deacon has a nice account of this. So between the first universal common ancestor and our last universal common ancestor, which is all of life on Earth is related to a descendant of what's called LUCA. Lots of great inventions got online before even the last universal common ancestor. So for example, proteins are these molecular machines that are responsible for everything we do. They're made of amino acids. So the amino acid has a left and a right side. And so they can form these chains. And it has 24 bits of data. It has 20 different side chains. So there's a 20 element set of amino acids. And the only difference between them is this side chain. And that side chain is like, 4 bits or whatever. But it's like, is it big or small? Is it charged or not charged? Is it hydrophobic or hydrophilic? And because of these different decisions that you make, you code physics to do something. You're writing symbols that are made out of physics. And so these determine the folding conformations and constitute a switch. When I say proteins do everything, they're what, in your eyeball, when the light comes in, a protein is folding at the frequency of the light. And, like the membrane, your cell membrane is made of proteins and the receptors are made of proteins. Everything's proteins. And the genetic code is a function. So that proteins got online before LUCA. The genetic code is a function from codons. There's ACGT is the DNA nucleotides. There's 3 of them in a codon, so that's 4 to the 3. There's 4 to the 3 possible codons. And there's 20 amino acids. So there's a function that from the 64 element set to a 20 element set. So out of the 20 to the 64 possible functions, LUCA found apparently 1 in a million. You can find a paper, it's like genetic code is 1 in a million. 99.9999 percentile best code. Before genetics even got online, it solved this information theory problem for error correction. 99.99 percentile best code. They didn't even have genetics. There was no, right? It wasn't. It somehow was able to do this without genetics and bootstrap to that. And it also invented repair. So before LUCA, 3.5 billion years ago, proteins were already fixing the protein production machinery. But I mean, you could say this was an invention. It was just somehow found. But I think there might have been something guiding the search. It seems amazing to me.
Sorry, could I ask what you said? It was before genetics. What?
In the sense that this 20 to the 64 element is the current element of all life on Earth. Maybe there's like 1 or 2, like 0.001% of animals that don't have this, but like or bacteria that don't have it. But everyone on Earth is doing the same element of 20 to the power 64. And the element that they're doing is 99%. But that element is genetics. That's the genetic code. That's the translation when the people,
I see.
Yeah, you're right. That is the thing that turns your DNA into proteins. Okay. So by the time of LUCA, life had also invented remarkable molecular machines. So ATP synthase, it's an actual turbine that spins and produces ATP. That was online. ATP is a rechargeable battery that stores energy and releases it on demand. There was like flagellar motors that could spin a propeller. That was going. There were nanoscale, right? These are all nanoscale machines with moving parts that are built from proteins. And each is like a catalyst that lets some larger thing happen to break symmetry. So a bacterium is able to swim in a direction towards the gradient of sugar. So it breaks the symmetry towards sugar using its motor, its flagellum. So these machines were then wired into networks. We get biological circuits. So like genes are regulating other genes, proteins controlling other proteins. And the interaction pattern of all this stuff depends on how or determines how the cell responds. But how is it invented? So they say it was designed without a designer. That's fine, but I think that so random mutation and natural selection are very slow and blind. But I find it hard to believe that blind search would create turbines. I think something was structuring the search, and I think that structure is what we're seeking in this talk, and not that we're going to answer it, but that I think it's important to look for to account for our inventiveness. How should we think about how this could have happened? So one thing I think is interesting is that someone named Spivak introduced something called self-organized criticality as like via the sand pile model. So the pile is constantly tuned to this critical slope. You don't load it. You just keep dropping sand on it, and then one grain of sand can trigger an avalanche of any size. So there's something called like a power law distribution. So you can't tell if it's going to be 2 grains or 200,000 grains. There are these reshaping events. The avalanches reshape the ground. So, or another case, a river floods. So when the river floods, it carves new channels that redirect future flow. It's like a river carves its own channel, right? So it's like a memory is baked in. You don't have to make memory. You don't have to figure out how memory gets made. It was made when a river chooses its channel. And it chooses it because basically the gradient of moving water moves pebbles out of the way. And because it moves pebbles out of the way, it can keep going in that same place. It's not fancy. It's just memory is kind of carving in. In cells, stress triggers new responses that rewire the future sensitivity of that cell. Or in brains, if you fail to predict something, if something doesn't make sense, if someone's talking up here and it's not making sense, that's exactly the moment that, like, when your old accounting isn't fitting, that's the moment where you're going to do some new rewiring. And so when you have this avalanche, when it's not all settling out, that's when you get this new thing. Or in societies, after a crisis cascades through the society, then institutions reorganize around it. So there's this idea of avalanches sculpting the ground. So maybe this could be a source of our inventiveness. So the flow reshapes the ground. At every scale, whether it's molecular, cellular, neural, social, we have the same pattern that cells are built from molecular switches, brains are built from cells, society is built from people. And at each scale, the wiring, the connection pattern of who's talking to who can change based on what's flowing. So at each level, and one reason I'm talking about that is because that's what the math at the end is going to be about. But at each scale, the wiring can change based on what flows through it. And the portable coordination we have at this scale can lay the groundwork for the next scale. So the math of today is based on the math of yesterday. We can use the old stuff, the old ways we coordinated between different areas to lay the groundwork for today's math. But today's math is also based on the biology of yesterday, like our bodies. So back to scale, back to history, how did these scales get built from each other? Let's go back to this history of inventiveness. So the eukaryote, which our bodies are made of, was when an archaeon that needed H2 engulfed a bacterium that made H2. So this was not predation. This was the fact that archaea has a flexible membrane and could just wrap around. It just got closer and closer to this thing that it was emitting H2 and then just engulfed it. And the bacteria multiplied inside, and so a eukaryotic cell has many mitochondria. But the membrane kept compartmentalizing to form the endoplasmic reticulum and nucleus, et cetera. So a eukaryote is like a city with lots of bacteria as citizens. But a city needs addresses. So the endoplasmic reticulum attaches sugar tags to proteins, and these are address labels. And then the cell reads the label and routes the protein to the right room. So before that invention, everything had to be near where it was used, and it just traveled by diffusion. Whereas after that invention, it could be manufactured in one spot and sent to another spot. So we didn't invent addressing. That's old. We have these copyable addresses. The city also had this external public-facing interface. So some proteins, these receptor proteins, got routed to the cell surface, and they're how the cell presents itself to other cells and receives signals from other cells. And the cells can change receptors based on what's happening inside. And again, that's supposed to be a call forward. How do you say it? Foreshadowing of the math. But so the interface itself, what it can send and receive, changes. And multicellularity becomes possible because cells can read each other's surfaces. So that was invented, like the fact that you can communicate between different cells. Mate selection. Before sexual selection, if you wanted to reproduce, you had to just keep surviving, and it was basically replication rate. So the environment was a feedback loop from genome to genome. And then sex began apparently as DNA repair. So they would just kind of import a matching sequence to fix a break in the DNA. But then it started becoming deliberate shuffling. So it would like kind of find the DNA pieces on purpose somehow, and then mate selection. And these are just smarter and smarter filtering. So with mate selection, an organism evaluates another organism and says, "Oh, you're good. Let's have a baby." And so the chooser navigates the life world, finds food, reads threats, assesses, and others can see how you survive. It's no longer blind selection. Now all of a sudden, nature is searching for good things that are good at something that they want. So in my opinion, they say, intelligent design implies some larger thing. But if you think like a god or something, but if you think about it as just we intelligently designed Zoom and wood, Podia, then like we're constantly using our intelligence to design. And probably nature used all the intelligence that it could muster at any given moment to design the next moment, to design the next. So this is an invention that improves our inventiveness. So the filter itself of who dies and who survives, it now has intelligence. It's not just replication rates. We can amplify what's working, not just wait till it dies. And this more refined choice in the filter means faster and better directed search. And this invention accelerates genomic change. In other words, our ability to invent would be like, oh, you're doing something interesting, even if it's very simple. Somehow we're able to see like the sound that this bug is making is like really, that's a really high quality sound that you're making, and I want to be a part of that. So from cell, okay, I'm going to do the rest of it now. So from cells all the way to this slide, many big inventions. So multicellularity, cells reading other cell surfaces, coordinating. They start making gap junctions where they can directly channel and share ions and signals and they're like the stuff inside their bodies. And then neurons took gap junctions and then like made it way faster. I think like 50 or 100 times faster. And this allows for really fast feedback loops. So you can outpace the environment. You can kind of model what the environment's going to do internally and predict it ahead of time. So we got neurons online. I want to make a distinction between written and verbal language. Can it exist without energy? So like when I'm talking right now, I need to supply energy to wiggle my vocal cords to talk to you. And most communication between animals is like this kind of thing. You're jiggling something. Whereas DNA and cave paintings and flash drives, they're kind of nounal. I made that word up. They persist without energy. So the DNA can live for 100 years or 1,000 years without degenerating. And so it kind of just sits there as like a noun. So I don't know if this is true, but it seems to me that written language was invented twice. So DNA is a written language. It sits there passively, symbol system that controls everything in your body. And 50,000 years ago or whatever, we invented it again, maybe like 100 times, 50,000 years ago, but all about the same time. And between there, it seems like it was all just verbal language. But then Turing systematized the relation between written and language and process by doing the Turing machine where a read head reads the tape. And then this slide is then written in LaTeX and actively displayed for you. So this is LaTeX. In other words, what I'm saying is it's written. It's sitting here in some sense passively. And then you're processing it. So we're still inventing ways to route energy more precisely and efficiently. And this inventiveness goes back to before Luca. It seems like just immense inventiveness. And again, we're saying, how do we account for this? Words are cheap. I've been talking about this stuff, but we need to firm up the accounting so we can get somewhere. So that's the next section. Accounting supports life. So every major invention in our story made some kind of form more portable. So the first universal common ancestor encapsulated itself, became portable, left the hydrothermal vent. A genetic code is a portable recipe. So, your mother basically eats hamburgers and peas and carrots and all this, whatever she wants to eat. And then the DNA just takes whatever is coming in there and just like makes a body out of it. So it's so portable, it doesn't even care what you're eating. It's just like, it's got this idea of what it wants to be. And as long as you pour the right stuff over it, it'll like come into being. Sugar tags route proteins to the right address. So we've upgraded our transportation. Written language persists without energy, makes plans portable, makes it so you can book tickets. So portability enables composition into larger collectives because when something can land somewhere, then it can start interacting with what was already there. You can join more wholes, live in more places, handle more situations. And a collective catalyzes, like when we coordinate on something, we're catalyzing something to happen. If you can coordinate with somebody, you can make larger scale outcomes happen. The larger collective has more choice points in it, and so it has more capacity for high precision energy routing. But parts in these collectives that can do much bigger things, like all of a sudden a bacterium can aim itself, or we can get oil out of the ground, the parts involved in that can frustrate each other. So your move can cause me problems. Like if you want to change the name to omega categories, and we're currently going with infinity categories, like that might be a problem. So we can frustrate each other. Like, are you sure? But that a collective whose parts conflict will waste energy. And the more conflict there is, if it's just repeated conflict, it probably won't persist. So the coordination is the key aspect to catalyzing these big events. We have to be able to coordinate. And what makes coordination at scale possible? And I think it's accounting. So accounting means toward reckoning together. It's to bring a reckoning together towards something, towards settling. When you have a good accounting system, you can settle the argument. When everything's accounted for, nothing is left over. It's kind of settled. So an account is what you give so that others can coordinate with you. So why are you doing this? Well, you account for why you're doing it. You're accountable, and then at least it makes sense, and they can work with that. So a collective is able to catalyze at its scale, and accounting is what enables it. So parts that can't account for their activity can't coordinate. Accounting makes internal, and again, I'm talking about accounting in kind of human form, but the point is that it must have existed for a long time, or at least I'll try to prove that. So accounting makes internal activity legible and regulatable. I asked you to regulate me at the beginning if I was wrong about math terms or about etymology or whatever. So regularity is not predictability. When people talk about predictive processing or something, or you can't predict what I'm going to say necessarily or what the next math thing is about, but you can regulate it. So chess is regular. You don't predict what I'm going to do, but you know if I move my pawn to the left, then you just tell me you're not allowed to do that, and I'm gonna fix it. Or if I make a mistake mathematically, I'm regulatable. I'm accountable. I think accountability makes things regulatable. And so portability creates these collectives, and accounting is what holds them together because they can coordinate. If mathematical fields are crystallized accounting systems, we want to account for the pattern we've been tracking, where form becomes portable, which allows it to compose into collectives. Collectives need accounting in order to coordinate, and interaction patterns keep changing based on what occurs there. And so one question we can now ask is, if we're going to account for this, we should ask, are we the first? And we're saying that accounting is what does this, then clearly we should not be the first to produce accounting systems. So I think biology had accounting systems before us. So if it's making a collective's activity legible and regulatable within itself, it's what you give others so they can coordinate with you. And when everything's accounted for, you find this new balance and things can settle. Well, DNA accounts for itself. Like it encodes what's needed to make DNA work. It tells, not just tells like in words, but tells in physics, using molecules, how to make DNA. So there's a little part of the DNA that says what DNA will be made of. It's going to be made of nucleotides, which are exactly this molecule. There's a little part of DNA that says exactly how DNA is going to be copied. There's a little part of DNA that says exactly how you're going to read DNA. So DNA is accounting for all of that stuff, and nothing critical is left out. So it's a Quine, like a program that can print out its own source code. But that Quine is not written in Python. That Quine is written in physics. So a cell is a thing that must settle itself despite constant novelty. So you're in some novel situation, or persons for that matter, and you need to be able to settle. And so a cell is able to do that. So signaling molecules are accounts. Each cell kind of reports its state to others and says what it needs. Gene regulation adjusts activities so that the collective resettles. Like these things are able to regulate and say what's needed in a language that others can understand. So each new collective needs accounting to handle the novelty at that scale. And I think that, defining exactly what accounting should mean might be difficult, but I think that there's a sense in which biology invented accounting, the ability to express where you are so that you can settle and so that you can coordinate within yourself 3.5 billion years ago. So next, I'm going to move into the math part where I'm going to try and mostly fail to account for ourselves using category theory, but at least have some kind of model of something related to what we've been talking about, even though it's going to miss most of it. The point being that it's a large open field to understand like how we came to be here. That should be obvious. And but I think category theory is relevant because it's good at structuring things, and we need to understand a structure, the structure that can repeat over and over throughout this whole story.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Earlier, you accounted for DNA as like a portable system, something that was like abstraction that you were, plugging into various different collectives that are like sort of self-organizing. But here you're writing it as accounting. Is there like a sense in which I'm supposed to be thinking of like accounting mechanisms as themselves being portable, or is that not really going to be?
Yeah, accounting mechanisms seem to themselves be portable. Like a good accounting system, we should be able to have everyone doing plus or whatever. Yeah. Okay, so we can imagine making new systems from old by wiring them together. So Joyal and Street invented string diagrams for monoidal categories. So a string diagram is an up-to-homotopy one-dimensional submanifold of R2 with some properties. And then with Verity, they invented trace monoidal categories, which include like these loops. So these are string diagrams, but they become wiring diagrams when you add this outer box. And the reason to add the outer box is so that you can see that there's an operatic structure here. So this is going to be a map from 5 things to one thing, 5 colors to one color. This outer box has 2 inputs and 2 outputs and stuff like that. But the point is, sorry, what I mean to say is, as an operad, there are 5 things inside of one thing. And so you can nest wiring diagrams. If I put a little string diagram for trace monoidal categories into here and here and here, then I'll get a string diagram in the whole thing. So it's an operad. And the operad for trace monoidal categories is the endomorphism operad of 1 cob, because basically the P3 here is a signed set with an oriented 0 manifold with 2 negative and 1 positive. And so we disjoint union all those together. And this picture that I've drawn here is just a cobordism from that to Q. So up to equivalence, a trace monoidal category is a functor, an operad functor, from 1 cob over O, some set of objects, some generating set, to the operad of sets. What I mean by that is that the trace monoidal category tells you the set of morphisms inside of each of these things and says if you pick one element, one morphism in each of these, then I can give you a morphism in the whole thing. Okay, so this picture here, cobordisms, are a syntax for composition in trace monoidal categories. So for any W, operad W, let's call its objects boxes for now, and its morphisms wiring diagrams. So a functor from W to set would assign to each box the set of fillers for that box, and then it would also assign an operation that takes inner fillers to an outer filler for each map from B1 through BK to B prime. And again, a functor would be a trace monoidal category. So here's an almost example, and that is that you could imagine each box being filled by an input-output ODE. So for example, you could think your body or a cell's body is an interface. It's got some signals that it can send and some signals it can receive. So I can receive light, I can receive sound, and I can like move my body around. So that's what I can send, is like the shape and also like my vocal cords moving around. And so we imagine we send elements of Rm and receive elements of Rn. Then what I mean by that is if like there was an M input, N output box here, I would be imagining that the set of fillers would be the set of all ODE systems. So what is an ODE system there? It's like some vector of state that is changing based on the current state and based on what's coming into the box. So because of what I'm hearing from you, what I'm seeing into my eyes, my internal state is changing. And then based on what my internal state is doing, I'm reading that out to my limbs or whatever. And so you could fill each of these boxes by an ODE system that's taking in inputs and giving out outputs. And there's some vector field that's changing based on what I'm seeing in front of me. So you could fill each inner box with an input-output ODE system. All I mean by that is some X dot that has a parameter A that's changing in time and giving out some B function of X. And then if I have this phi, this wiring diagram, this morphism in my operad, then I can take fillers, ODE systems for each of these internal boxes and get an ODE system for the external box. And I put question marks everywhere because it doesn't quite work. And that is because ODE systems don't form a traced category. They almost do. But the reason is there's no identity. There's no ODE system that can send this input A to this output B instantly. Because even if you tried x dot equals A minus x to like, it'll exponentially approach, x will exponentially approach A, but it will never reach A. So there's no identity for this thing. And so you could say, oh my gosh, well, what's a traced monoidal category without identities? What is the yanking axiom going to do? I don't know if you know what these things are, but you could say, I don't know. I'm worried. I don't think that's a real thing. Maybe everything falls apart. What do I do? But the answer is you just change your wiring diagram operad. You could allow splits if you want to. You can just say, obviously there's an operad. I mean, you can write it down where you don't have wires that pass straight through. You're not allowed to have those, but you are allowed to have splits. You can write whatever you want and just check that it's an operad in the sense that if that was also happening inside of each of these little boxes, then when you compose, it's still happening. And so the operatic view is that we view structured categories like trace monoidal categories, symmetric monoidal, whatever, as semantics for wiring, for basically operad algebras, but semantics for wiring as the syntax. So we can add and forget structure. We can take a left adjoint from symmetric monoidal categories to trace monoidal categories by just changing our operad, or forget structure. But we could do much more. We can use intuition from W algebra to make the wiring here way more fancy. And the way I want to make it more fancy is that in biology, the circuits here are not soldered in, they change. So instead of this circuit existing for all time, can you imagine a wiring diagram that based on what's flowing through that wiring diagram, like if I hit the disconnect button on my laptop, something's flowing through the wires and that causes the wiring diagram to change. Just like the avalanche caused the land to change, what's flowing through the thing is supposed to change the thing. And so we want some notion of wiring diagram that's able to change based on what flows through it. This is what happens, yeah. So a cell's and even further, you could even ask that these interfaces themselves could change based on what flows through them. So based on what's received into P3, maybe the number of ports could change. Can you handle that sort of thing? It's hard to imagine how you'd handle that in terms of monoidal categories, but in terms of operads, you just kind of say what you want, and as long as you can make it compose, it'll work. So that's the question. What's the math for wiring diagrams that can change based on what flows through them? And so from there, I want to go to this category of polynomial functors because it's a really elegant category, a very expressive category, and it helps you model such systems. I'm just thinking of one variable polynomial functors on set. This category is equivalent to the free completely distributive category on a point. So what I mean is if you take one object and you freely add products and you freely add sums, then you get polynomial functors. It turns out those are equivalent to connected limit preserving functors from set to set. Or on set, they're arbitrary coproducts of representables. So the sum over I and I of y to the ai. That's a polynomial functor. And a morphism between them is just natural transformation, but because these are so simple, the unital lemma and the coproduct universal property says that if I want a map from one to another, well, I can take the sum out of the left-hand side and put a product. Then I can take Yoneda and put this sum here, so sum j and j. And then for every element of bj, then I'm looking at maps from bj to ai, which means product over bj ai of 1. But I want to look at the form of this thing because it's so easy to compute. It just says for every I and I, which I'm thinking of as like an output, we're going to think of these as the outputs of machines and these as the inputs. But for every output of I get an output of j. And then for every input here, I come back to an input here. So there's this forward and back notion. Natural transformations just naturally have this forward on indices, backwards on exponents fact about them. So, and now poly as a category has a lot of structure. The reason I like it is super easy to compute with, and it has a lot of structure. It's from functors to set to set. So for example, it has all the limits and co-limits. It has at least 3 orthogonal factorization systems that I know of. It's Cartesian closed. It has infinitely many monoidal closed structures. I can't think of any categories that even have 2. But this one has infinitely many monoidal closed structures. Indeed, for every monoidal product on set, that's where these are coming from. There's infinitely many of those. That lifts to a distributive monoidal structure on poly. And there's another operation, substitution of functors, which is monoidal. And that thing has a co-closure, which is that left Kohn extensions of polynomials along polynomials are polynomials. So, and finally, these 2 things, composition and tensor product, deconvolution of times, are duoidal. This seems to be. But the point is that there's a lot of structure. I'm not asking you to memorize any of this. I'm just saying this thing is a very well-behaved, happy, healthy category. Now, coalgebras are where we're going to try to get to this more dynamical systemsy point of view. So for a functor set to set, a coalgebra is a set S and a map from S to f of S. And for any polynomial P, the category of P coalgebras forms a topos. I'm not going to use that fact, but I'm just saying it's a well-behaved thing. And so, for example, if we take a monomial, by to the a, then a map from S to by to the a of S is a function from S to B. That's going to be the readout. That's going to be like in a Moore machine. It's going to turn out to be a Moore machine. A Moore machine is a little computer. It's going to map from S to B times S to the A will be a map from S to B, the readout, and a map from S times A to S, a map from S to the A. Right, so this is called a Moore machine with inputs A and outputs B. And right, that's a lot. Wow, okay. So we're going to think of a map from P1 tensor ... pk to P prime as an interaction pattern. Throughout this talk, I've been talking about wiring diagrams and interaction patterns. You have lots of little things in a thing. And what it's going to do is it's going to transform the outputs of the P1 through PKs into an output of P prime, together with a function from the inputs of P prime to the inputs back here of P1 through PK. So in symbols, a map from P1 tensor PK, a map in this operad or monoidal category, I guess, from this thing to this thing, I guess we'll think of it as an operad, is for each output of these guys, give me an output of this guy, and then for each input of this guy, give me an input of all these guys. And that sounds complicated, but it turns out is exactly what you want for wiring diagrams. So here's the formula for the internal HOM here. It says that the internal HOM from P1 through PK to P prime is a map from P1 through PK to P prime times y to the power, or the representable on the outputs of these and the inputs of these. So it's too much to have you understand completely, but it's on the slides in case you wanted to look later. So the question is, what is this internal HOM coalgebra? What that will be is a state machine that outputs interaction patterns. It outputs ways that it outputs these. Not exactly wiring diagrams, but ways of taking the outputs of all the P's and feeding them around to each other. That's what a that's what a coalgebra on this internal HOM will give you. Together with, I wish I'd just drawn this here. Together with, so for each state, it'll give you a wiring diagram. And then based on what's flowing through this wiring diagram, it'll update its state. So that turns out to be what this naturally does. So we can greatly increase our wiring diagram syntax by allowing this rewiring. Define org to be the monoidal category with objects, polynomials, and with org maps from P to Q to be these PQ coalgebras. So it's a bicategory. These rewiring diagrams, things that output interaction patterns and input what's flowing to give you new states. So we defined a dynamic category, a dynamic operad, dynamic prop, etc., to be category, operad, prop enriched in this thing. And what it means, for example, training a neural network is a dynamic prop. For example, there's a strong monoidal functor from manifolds to polynomials that takes a manifold M and writes the polynomial that is the sum over points in M of the tangent space there. And that is a strong monoidal functor. So it sends Lie groups to Hopf monoids, for example. So you can just take all of Rn's, T of Rn is actually the nth tensor power of T of R. And so training an Rm to an Rn neural network is just a certain coalgebra, a certain map in this prop. In this prop, there's T of R, that's the only object, the only color, and we just take, like, training a neural network is an example of a coalgebra. This gradient descent algorithm and backpropagation algorithm is exactly encoded in this coalgebra. Yeah, so the current input-output pattern, when you put in some vector and a vector comes out of your neural network, that is the and the way gradient is going to be passed back. That's the current state. That's the current parameters of your neural network. And then when you update the parameter based on what you did, the training data that you actually entered, that updating the neural network is the coalgebra, the other part of the coalgebra, like this part. So more generally, we can actually not only change the wiring, but also the interfaces. And I don't have time to explain that, but basically the fact that if you receive something, you could lose a leg, or if you receive something, you could gain a prosthetic. You're gaining or losing your interface. The box itself is actually changing based on what's sent to it. And so this could model a cell that changes their receptors through time. And so that's kind of as far as I've gotten with this program. So in summary, life invents coordination structures at every scale. Portability makes these coordination structures composable, and accounting lets the coordination actually happen. DNA is an account that coordinates its own creation. It explains how it's going to be made. And then every level of coordination lays the groundwork for the next level of coordination. And so the search really is kind of directed. And mathematical fields are human invented accounting systems. Each one accounts for phenomena that we see in the world, from finance to quantum. And Poly itself is very expressive but easy to compute with. That's why I like it. And it accounts for systems with changeable interaction patterns. So it seems to me that maybe inventing accounting systems like we are doing here is what accounts for our inventiveness. Thank you.
Okay, any questions for David?
Yeah.
First off, thanks for the talk. It was really interesting. You spoke at the beginning about this high precision energy routing, almost as though it's a goal for these systems.
Right.
Could you maybe speak on how that might appear within this formal model of like self sort of rewriting systems, and B, maybe how this neural network example realizes that in a precise way?
Okay, that's hard. Yeah, so the question was, high precision energy routing seems like I'm presenting it as though it was a goal. And really what I'm saying is, if it were a goal, that would kind of make sense because we keep getting better at it. But not that, I don't know why that goal. Maybe the goal is actually entropy maximization or something, but this leads to that or whatever. So then the question was, how would the account I gave of like neural networks and like things that rewire themselves help you get more high precision energy routing?
I guess I was asking like if it could be sort of that notion could be made precise and formalized in that example.
That's what I want. That's what I want. So what I want would be to formalize what high precision energy routing means and put it into like these rewiring diagrams or something. But yeah, the idea is somehow like where, yeah, I don't know if it's clear why I think that would lead to high precision energy routing, but it like you have these little boxes that are somehow deciding they want to route energy through switches. So I don't even know how I can explain it. That's exactly the question, and I don't know the answer.
Sure.
Yeah. Tomer.
So one of the examples were something like gradient descent, right?
Yeah.
Or one of those things. So can you state some kind of a universal property of the gradient? Like supposedly I could imagine that, given a loss function, in some kind of formalism, gradient descent has some universal property.
I don't know if gradient descent has a universal property, but what I think is important about gradient descent is that the Riemannian structure gives you a map from T star to T at a point. And that means that when you get a gradient passed back to you, you can choose a direction to move. And so, but that direction to move is not it's as canonical as the Riemannian metric. But Like, I don't know.
Optimal in some sense.
It's optimal in some sense, but yeah,
Category theory knows how to say that
I don't think so. Not that I know of. Yeah. Yeah.
Here's like actually sort of building off this, is there a way to do like chaotic systems, like systems that are, I don't know, I imagine like you have something like you know, you roll a ball down a hill and it interacts with a wall and changes its, or like you have a circuit where every time you go down the circuit it's like interacting or something, or like the river example where the precise nature in which it's like interacting with the thing is causing sort of like chaotic phenomena to propagate further on.
Mhm.
So this particular example would be less like make use of the metric, but more make use of like, I don't know, symplectic structure to talk about like moving orthogonally and how that might update the form itself somehow.
Yeah, I don't know enough about that, but I wrote a paper with somebody who apparently did, and we use the symplectic structure here to do like physics systems where you have like you take two pendula and you say that the input-output behavior of the pendulum is just like the bob and the pivot, and then you can connect them in the same kind of way we did here and get the dynamics of the whole thing.
So like
Using-
double pendulum.
For a double pendulum.
Yeah, it's like the
But I don't know if that's what you're talking about, but yeah, okay,
Exactly.
that's chaotic. I see. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yes.
So I really like the idea of portability, but there's one thing I find slightly confusing for me because like in practice in life science, the coordinate system has or structure has certain kind of robustness.
Has some certain kinds of what?
The robust, like it allows certain level of errorness that can still work. But category theory is a language which you kind of everything has to be very, very precise.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a way to take that into account.
Right. Category theory has to be very precise, whereas biology seems to be robust to minor, small errors.
Yes.
And one reason is because there's error correction in the, right?
Yeah.
So as long as you have error correction, then you don't need the, then it's okay to have error. But right, so how do you bake that into the category? So first of all, the category theory allows you to be in a manifold or something. You can be in a manifold where you have something that is robust to errors because of some kind of like, when there's an error, you exponentially decrease it because of something. And it's like the category theory is just the algebra of how you want to how you're going to compose things and put them together. But if the things that you're composing each have error correction, then that's safe as long as you tell me what error correction is and how it composes.
And it also tells me if the error is kind of too large, I cannot proceed.
Right. I give up. Yeah. There's some kind of hysteresis or something where like in a certain case it'll just evaporate, but if it's too much, it'll do something. Like with the siphon, you pull on the siphon and water, if you don't pull on enough, it just goes back. But if you pull on enough, then you can drain the lake or whatever. So, but yeah, I think my guess is that you just need to say what you want your objects to be, that they're error correcting things. Okay. Like in a math class, we're all going to like correct the errors we see. If we see a typo, if it's small enough, we'll just correct it on our own. But if it's too big, then we have to raise our hand and say that's not making sense. As long as everything in sight has an error correction thing, then maybe you would have some error correction on the whole. That would be the kind of thing you'd want to algebraically show. Like the category theory is trying to tell you what should compose. Yeah.
I have a question. In this conference on omega categories, so far this is all one categorical.
It is, yeah.
Can you just muse on?
Well, there's two categories. There's a bicategory.
Okay.
I don't know how. I haven't really seen it. Yeah.
But we're doing it, so there must be.
We're doing it, so it must be there, right? The spheres are there. Yeah. It's
Oh,
but the problem is like for example, like a sphere where you have tiny little holes in your tennis ball that you can't even see. Like, I don't know, like a bottle with a cap. Like a bottle is different than a saucer. So it's like in real life, it seems like geometry matters.
On that bombshell. So, given a arbitrary, just physical system where we don't have a choice of circuit diagrams yet, or like a choice of abstractions of what the subsystems are, how do we choose one?
Yeah, so I don't know if I've been repeating all the questions, but this one was in a system where we don't know what the abstraction should be yet, how do we choose one? Yeah. And one answer to that is that, for example, tensor networks are are algebras on the operative cospans. So if you have some kind of picture like this, and you put a tensor into each of these, then you get a tensor in the whole thing. And you could ask, like, how should you actually compute that tensor, like this entire tensor? And so in reality, you should cluster it, because when you cluster it, and you should cluster it the right way, because like you have matrices A, B, C. We know we're allowed to do either one by the associative law, but one will be a trillion times faster than the other, right? So you should definitely cluster this thing. And it turns out the way you cluster it looks like the way you kind of should cluster it. Like in terms of like, well, I didn't draw a good one, but if you had something like this, and you wanted to cluster this for the fastest computation possible, you should do this one and this one, like like min cut kind of thing. So maybe what's happening is that you should cluster things and decide on, you have all these little atoms, but the way you should cluster them is by which one the computation, like maybe our job is to compute what we're going to do and like put that on our surface so that others can coordinate with us or something. Some minimal representation, some fastest way of, like, there's a high latency feedback between me and you compared to between my brain cells and themselves. Sure. And so you should kind of like package up all the low latency stuff.
Something, I guess.
Yeah, this is probably accounting. So yeah.
Okay, so I propose we leave further questions for after, and let's thank David again.